Divide County, North Dakota, February 1897. While his neighbors stacked hay bales against barn walls and prayed their livestock would survive another brutal plains winter, Lars Bjornsted did something they called insane. He dug a tunnel, not to find gold, not to store root vegetables, a tunnel from his house to his barn. 140 feet of backbreaking labor through frozen earth, reinforced with salvaged railroad ties and field stone. That Norwegian's lost his mind, said Henry Caldwell, who'd farmed the territory for 12 years. Wasting a month's work on a gopher hole when he should be cutting firewood. The mockery echoed through every general store and Sunday gathering within 50 miles. Even Gustav Reinhardt, a German homesteader known for his engineering precision, shook his head. In the old country, we built proper barns. This is desperation masquerading as innovation. But Lars Bjornsted wasn't desperate. He was remembering stone passages beneath Norwegian farmsteads where his grandfather tended sheep during Arctic storms. Remembering Earth itself as insulation, as stability, as the warmth that never froze. What did this immigrant farmer understand about thermal physics that men with twice his experience had forgotten? And why would a simple underground passage become the difference between devastation and survival when the coldest winter in recorded history descended on the northern plains? Before we reveal what happened, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I promise you, the engineering wisdom you're about to discover will change how you think about survival in extreme cold. Now, let's dig into the story that silenced an entire county. Lars Bjornsted arrived in Divide County in the spring of 1895 with his wife Ingrid, 3 children, $47, and a memory that wouldn't let him rest. He'd grown up in Valdres, Norway, where winter temperatures regularly plunged below 0 Fahrenheit, and stayed there for months. His family's farm had survived centuries of Arctic conditions using techniques the North Dakota homesteaders had never considered. The tunnel project began in September 1896, immediately after harvest. While neighbors focused on laying in firewood and winterizing above-ground structures, Lars marked a straight line from the northwest corner of his house to the south entrance of his barn. 140 feet. He would dig 5 feet deep and 4 feet wide, shore it with whatever materials he could salvage or afford, and slope it gently for drainage. "You planning to mine coal down there, Bjornsted?" asked Thomas Bradley, the county's most successful wheat farmer. Bradley had built the region's largest barn, a 2-story structure with double walls filled with straw insulation. He'd invested in cast-iron stoves and stored enough cordwood to heat a small village. Because that hole won't keep anything warm. You're just making it easier for the cold to reach your foundation. The criticism came from a place of genuine concern and American confidence. These were men who'd conquered a harsh landscape using brute force and abundant resources. More wood, thicker walls, bigger stoves. The idea that digging down instead of building up could provide thermal advantage seemed backwards, primitive, wasteful. Lars didn't argue. He simply continued digging. Each day before dawn and after evening chores, he descended with shovel and pickaxe, removing approximately 12 cubic feet of earth and clay. His sons, aged 14 and 12, hauled buckets to the surface. When the ground froze in late October, he used fire to soften sections, then dug while the earth was workable, an old technique that made Bradley laugh outright. Burning wood to dig a hole to save wood. "The logic is flawless," Bradley announced at the general store, drawing approving chuckles. But Lars understood something fundamental about the earth itself. Below the frost line, approximately 4 feet in North Dakota, soil temperature remains relatively constant year-round, fluctuating only slightly from its mean of around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. This geothermal stability, created by the Earth's core heat and insulated by the ground above, meant that his tunnel would never experience the extreme temperature swings that plague surface structures. By December, the passage was complete. Railroad ties, salvaged from an abandoned spur line, formed the ceiling supports every 6 feet. Field stones, carefully fitted, created walls that allowed minimal air infiltration while preventing collapse. The floor sloped 1 inch per 10 feet toward the barn, ensuring any water from snow melt or condensation would drain away from the house. At both ends, Lars constructed doors from doubled planks with leather hinges, creating airlocks that minimized heat exchange with the surface. The entire project consumed 29 days of labor and cost roughly $18 in materials, mostly nails, hinges, and a wagon rental to haul timber. Gustav Reinhardt, examining the finished work with professional interest despite his skepticism, had to admit the craftsmanship was sound. It's well built, he conceded, but it solves a problem that doesn't exist. A man can walk 140 feet through a blizzard. We've all done it. What Reinhardt missed, what they all missed, was that Lars hadn't built the tunnel for himself. The science behind Lars Bjornstad's tunnel was elegant, ancient, and completely invisible to men who trusted only what they could see burning in a stove. Above ground, North Dakota winter air behaves with brutal simplicity. When Arctic systems descend from Canada, pushing temperatures to 20, 30, even 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, that frigid air penetrates every gap, every crack, every imperfect seal in a structure. Wood contracts. Leather stiffens. Metal becomes brittle. Even Bradley's expensive double-wall barn, with its straw insulation and cast-iron stoves, hemorrhaged heat through 1,000 microscopic failures in its construction. Underground, physics operates on different principles entirely. The Earth is a thermal battery. During summer months, solar radiation heats the surface layers, and that warmth conducts downward gradually. During winter, the process reverses. The ground releases stored heat upward. But below the frost line, this exchange happens so slowly that temperature remains nearly constant. In Divide County's latitude, 4 feet below the surface, soil temperature hovers between 48 and 52 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, regardless of whether the air above is 90 degrees Fahrenheit in July or minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit in January. Lars's tunnel, buried 5 feet deep along most of its length, existed in this stable thermal zone. The Earth itself, millions of tons of clay and soil with high thermal mass, acted as insulation against temperature extremes. No wind could reach it. No blowing snow could find gaps to penetrate. The temperature inside the passage would never drop below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, even if the surface world descended into Arctic hell. But the tunnel's genius extended beyond simple insulation. Lars had created an environmental bridge between his house and barn, a corridor where warm air from his wood stove could flow naturally, mixing with the tunnel's stable 50-degree environment. More critically, he could move his livestock through this passage during the worst weather, not to bring them into his house, but to give them access to the tunnel itself as a shelter when barn temperatures became dangerous. It's superstition, declared Henry Caldwell when Lars tried to explain the concept at a community meeting. The man thinks dirt is warmer than a proper building. Next he'll be telling us to sleep in graves. The laughter that followed wasn't entirely unkind. These are practical men who measured wisdom in visible results. Caldwell heated his barn with a large fireplace that consumed 12 cords of wood each winter. Bradley's cast-iron stoves required constant feeding but maintained temperatures well above freezing even in harsh conditions. Both men could point to survival rates, to healthy livestock, to systems that worked through established, proven methods. Underground construction seemed like regression, a return to primitive dugouts that early settlers had abandoned as soon as they could afford proper lumber. The territory's own history spoke against it. Hadn't everyone moved above ground as quickly as possible? What they'd forgotten, or never known, was that those early dugouts had failed not because Earth was a poor insulator, but because they'd been dug poorly. Inadequate drainage led to flooding. Insufficient structural support caused collapses. Desperate construction by inexperienced hands had given underground building a reputation it didn't deserve. Lars's tunnel had none of those flaws. His sloped floor channeled water away. His stone walls and timber supports would outlast the wooden barns around them. And his understanding of geothermal stability, learned not from books, but from generations of Norwegian farmers who'd survived in conditions far harsher than North Dakota, gave him advantages his neighbors couldn't recognize. If you're finding this fascinating, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. The data we're about to reveal will shock you and might just save your homestead if you're building for extreme weather. Drop a comment and let me know. Would you have trusted Lars's tunnel, or would you have sided with the skeptics? By late December 1896, the debate had become academic. Everyone had winterized their farms as best they could. Cordwood stood stacked in massive ricks. Barns were sealed and banked with earth or manure for additional insulation. Livestock had been brought in from distant pastures. The community settled into the familiar rhythm of northern plains winter. Endure, survive, wait for spring. Then the weather changed. January 8th, 1897. The barometer in the Crosby General Store began falling at 9 in the morning, dropping steadily through the day in a way that made old-timers nervous. By evening, the temperature had plunged from a manageable 12 degrees Fahrenheit to -8 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind shifted to the northwest, the direction that brought Canada's worst. January 9th brought the first true test. Morning temperature, -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind gusting to 35 miles per hour, creating a wind chill that turned exposed skin frostbitten in minutes. Thomas Bradley made his morning check on his livestock, fighting through drifting snow to reach his barn. Inside, despite 2 stoves burning continuously, the temperature registered 28 degrees Fahrenheit. His breath formed clouds. Ice crusted the water troughs despite his attempts to keep them broken open. Henry Caldwell faced worse conditions. His barn, older and less insulated than Bradley's, had dropped to 19 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. 2 of his cows showed signs of cold stress, shivering, reduced feeding, labored breathing. He threw more wood into the fireplace, knowing he was already burning through his supply faster than planned. If this cold persisted, he'd face a choice between frozen livestock and an empty woodshed before March. Across Divide County, the story repeated itself. Farmers woke every 3 hours through the night to feed stoves and break ice. Children were dispatched with heated stones wrapped in burlap to warm the youngest calves. Some families brought their most valuable animals, pregnant ewes, prize bulls, into their homes, sacrificing comfort and hygiene for economic survival. At the Bjornsted farm, Lars woke at his normal time, dressed in his normal layers, and opened the door to his tunnel entrance. The small anteroom he'd built just inside showed 44 degrees Fahrenheit on the thermometer, cold enough to see your breath, but far above the deadly temperatures outside. He walked the 140 feet to his barn in shirt sleeves, carrying a lantern through air that remained a steady 47 to 49 degrees Fahrenheit along the entire passage. Inside the barn itself, connected to this stable thermal environment, temperature had dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. Cold, certainly, but not dangerously so. His 8 cows, 4 horses, and mixed flock of sheep and chickens showed no distress. Water in the metal troughs remained liquid. No ice, no shivering, no emergency measures required. Lars fed his animals their normal rations, checked their condition with the careful attention Norwegian farmers paid to livestock health, and returned through the tunnel to his house. Total time outside the protected environment, 0 minutes. Total exposure to -22 degrees Fahrenheit wind, 0 seconds. When he mentioned his morning chores to Ingrid over breakfast, she simply nodded. This was what they'd expected, what they'd built for, what his grandfather had done every winter for 83 years. But January wasn't finished with Divide County. January 12th, 1897, entered the historical record as the coldest day ever measured in North Dakota Territory up to that time. The morning temperature in Crosby registered -38 degrees Fahrenheit without wind. With a sustained 20-mile-per-hour gust from the northwest, the effective temperature, what livestock and humans actually experienced, dropped to nearly -65 degrees Fahrenheit. Thomas Bradley's expensive barn, with both stoves burning continuously and every gap sealed with rags and newspaper, could not maintain temperature above 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice formed on the inside walls. His water system froze solid despite his best efforts. 2 calves born the previous autumn died during the night, their body heat insufficient to survive even the warm environment he'd created. Henry Caldwell faced catastrophe. His barn dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the fireplace consuming wood at an unsustainable rate. By noon, he'd lost 1 cow to exposure, and 3 more showed severe cold stress. In desperation, he and his sons tried to move the animals to his house, but the 100-foot journey through the Arctic blast proved impossible. The cows wouldn't move. The wind was too strong. Frostbite threatened exposed skin in seconds. Across the county, farmers made brutal calculations. Some butchered animals they couldn't keep warm, salvaging meat before total loss. Others burned furniture, fence posts, anything combustible to feed their stoves a few more hours. Gustav Reinhardt, the precise German engineer, later reported burning through 8 cords of his winter wood supply in just those 3 days, nearly a quarter of his total reserves. At the Bjornsted farm, Lars walked his tunnel twice that day. Morning temperature inside, 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Evening temperature inside, 47 degrees Fahrenheit. The earth that surrounded his passage, insulated by 5 feet of soil above and extending infinitely in all directions, simply absorbed the surface cold without transmitting it downward. The thermal mass was too great, the insulation too effective, the physics too fundamental. His barn, connected to this stable environment, registered 36 degrees Fahrenheit on the coldest day in recorded history. All livestock survived without distress. Water remained liquid. No emergency measures were required beyond normal winter care. Lars used approximately 1/5 the firewood his neighbors consumed, and that was for his house alone. The barn needed no additional heating whatsoever. On January 13th, the temperature moderated to -12 degrees Fahrenheit. Neighbors emerged to assess their damage and bury their dead animals. The stories they shared were grim. Losses, near losses, depleted wood supplies, frostbite injuries. 3 full days and nights without sleep as families fought to keep their livestock alive. When Thomas Bradley asked Lars, almost casually, how his animals had fared, the Norwegian's answer was simple: fine. All fine. Bradley assumed he was lying, or exaggerating, or had simply gotten lucky with particularly hardy stock. Then Gustav Reinhardt visited the Bjornsted farm on January 15th, ostensibly to borrow tools, but really to satisfy his engineering curiosity. Lars showed him the tunnel without commentary, showed him the barn thermometer, showed him the healthy, calm livestock. Reinhardt stood in that underground passage for 5 full minutes, watching his own breath in the 48-degree air while knowing the surface temperature outside was still -18 degrees Fahrenheit. He touched the stone walls, examined the timber supports, calculated the thermal dynamics in his methodical German way. Herrgott, he whispered, it actually works. Gustav Reinhardt was a man who trusted mathematics, so he brought mathematics to bear on what he'd witnessed. Over the following 2 weeks, he visited the Bjornsted farm 3 more times, each time carrying his thermometers and notebook. He measured temperature gradients. He calculated wood consumption. He compared Lars's livestock condition to his own and to the herds of other local farmers. What emerged from his careful documentation was a portrait of efficiency that the community couldn't dismiss as Norwegian luck or superstition. The data was stark. Temperature stability, surface air temperature range during the cold snap, -38 degrees Fahrenheit to +4 degrees Fahrenheit, 42 degree swing. Lars's tunnel interior temperature range, 46 degrees Fahrenheit to 49 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 degree swing. Lars's barn temperature range, 35 degrees Fahrenheit to 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 degree swing. Bradley's insulated barn temperature range, 14 degrees Fahrenheit to 38 degrees Fahrenheit, 24 degree swing. Caldwell's barn temperature range, 8 degrees Fahrenheit to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 24 degree swing. Fuel consumption, January 8th to 20th, 12 days Caldwell barn, 2.3 cords of wood, approximately 920 cubic feet. Bradley barn, 1.8 cords of wood, approximately 720 cubic feet. Bjornsted barn, 0 cords, tunnel system required no supplemental heating. Bjornsted house, 0.7 cords. Normal winter consumption, none directed to barn. Livestock outcomes. Caldwell. 1 cow dead, 3 requiring extensive recovery care. Total loss approximately $85 Bradley. 2 calves dead. Total loss approximately $40. 17 other farms in the county reported losses ranging from chickens to horses. Bjornsted. 0 losses, 0 animals. Requiring special care, 0 additional expense beyond normal winter feed labor requirements. Neighbors averaged 18 to 22 hours of emergency livestock care during the 3-day crisis. Lars maintained his normal twice-daily feeding schedule with no additional time required. Reinhardt presented these findings at the February community meeting in Crosby. He did so without emotion, simply reading numbers from his notebook. But numbers have their own persuasive power. Thomas Bradley, who'd lost 2 calves and burned through a quarter of his winterwood supply, asked the question everyone was thinking. How much did the tunnel cost to build? Lars provided the accounting he'd kept meticulously. 29 days of labor, his own and his son's, no cash cost. $18.40 in materials, and approximately $6 in tool, wear, and wagon rental. Total monetary investment, $24.40. Bradley did the mathematics publicly, calculating aloud. I spent $62 on my barn insulation upgrade 3 years ago. I burn roughly 15 cords of wood each winter at current wood prices. That's about $30 in labor and land use. This January alone cost me $40 in dead stock plus the wood I'll now have to replace before next winter. And you're telling me your tunnel, which cost less than half what I spent on straw insulation, prevents all of that? Not all, Lars replied quietly. Your barn is larger. You have more animals. But yes, the tunnel prevents most of what you faced. The silence that followed was profound. These were men who'd built their lives on experience, on established methods, on visible, tangible solutions. Fire keeps you warm. Walls keep out cold. More of both equals better results. The idea that the absence of those things, that negative space, that going underground instead of building up, could be superior contradicted everything they knew. Henry Caldwell, who'd lost the most and had the least margin for future losses, spoke carefully. You'd be willing to show us exactly how you built it? The slope, the supports, all of it? Lars nodded. Of course. It's not secret. It's not even new. My grandfather did the same in Norway. His grandfather before him. They didn't invent it either, just learned from those who came before. What happened next entered local folklore. By late February, despite the continuing cold, 7 farmers had begun excavating their own tunnels. By April, after spring thaw, that number reached 14. Some connected houses to barns like Lars's design. Others created tunnel networks, linking multiple outbuildings. Chicken coops, root cellars, workshops, using the same principles of thermal stability and protection from surface extremes. Gustav Reinhardt, the engineer who documented the tunnel's performance, designed the most ambitious project, a full underground livestock shelter adjacent to his barn, with a tunnel entrance from his house. He calculated that the Earth's thermal mass, combined with minimal animal body heat, would maintain 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit year-round with 0 supplemental heating. Construction consumed his entire summer, but the following winter proved his mathematics correct. Thomas Bradley, whose pride had been wounded by the tunnel's success, made perhaps the most significant admission. At the October harvest celebration, he publicly acknowledged, I called Lars's tunnel a waste of effort. I was wrong. I based my judgment on what I'd seen work in Ohio, where I came from. But this isn't Ohio. This is Dakota territory, and Dakota territory requires Dakota solutions. Or maybe Norwegian solutions, or German solutions, or just solutions from anyone who's lived in truly cold places and learned what actually works. He paused, then added, I'm breaking ground on my own tunnel in the spring. I'd appreciate any advice from those who've already done it right. The applause that followed wasn't for Bradley's humility, though that deserved recognition. It was for the larger acknowledgement the community was making, that wisdom doesn't have a nationality, that traditional methods aren't automatically inferior to modern ones, and that sometimes the best innovation is learning what others already know. If these numbers surprise you, you're not alone. They surprised an entire county of experienced farmers. Hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and drop a comment. What's the coldest temperature you've ever dealt with on your homestead or property? Let's compare notes in the comments below. By March 1898, just 14 months after Lars Bjornsted completed his foolish tunnel, 43 farms within a 100-mile radius had incorporated some form of underground passage into their cold-weather livestock management. The designs varied. The execution ranged from rough but functional to Reinhardt's engineering precision. But the core principle remained constant. Let the earth do the work that fire and wood had been doing inefficiently. The technology wasn't new. What was new was its adoption by a community that had initially rejected it, and the data-driven recognition that sometimes survival wisdom from one harsh climate translates perfectly to another. By the spring of 1898, the tunnel phenomenon had evolved beyond simple replication. What began as Lars Bjornsted's faithful reconstruction of Norwegian tradition had spawned a generation of hybrid designs, each adapted to specific needs, terrain, and resources of individual homesteads across the northern plains. The variations revealed something fundamental about vernacular engineering. When people understand the principle rather than just copying the form, innovation accelerates. Gustav Reinhardt's underground livestock shelter became the talk of 3 counties. Rather than a simple passage, he'd excavated a chamber 18 feet wide and 32 feet long, positioned directly adjacent to his barn's foundation. The ceiling, supported by massive timber beams salvaged from an abandoned mill, sat 7 feet below grade. Access came through a 12-foot tunnel from his house, descending at a gentle slope. The mathematics behind his design were precise. Earth temperature at 7 feet depth, 49 to 51 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Interior volume, approximately 4,600 cubic feet. Expected occupancy during extreme cold, 16 cattle, each generating roughly 1,500 BTUs per hour of metabolic heat. Combined animal heat in that insulated space, 24,000 BTUs per hour. Required temperature increase from ambient 50 degrees Fahrenheit to comfortable 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Minimal. Expected fuel consumption for supplemental heating, 0. He was proven correct during the winter of 1898 to 99. On February 3rd, when surface temperatures dropped to minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit, Reinhardt's underground shelter maintained 54 degrees Fahrenheit with no heating system whatsoever, purely from earth insulation and animal body heat. His cattle remained calm, productive, and healthy throughout a winter that again devastated farms relying solely on above-ground structures. But perhaps the most unexpected innovation came from an unlikely source. Margaret O'Sullivan, a widow operating a small dairy farm 12 miles south of Crosby. She lacked the labor force for extensive excavation and couldn't afford the timber for elaborate supports. What she could do was observe, adapt, and simplify. Instead of a full tunnel, she dug a partial underground passage, only 40 feet long, connecting her kitchen to a reinforced root cellar position directly beneath her small barn. The passage sat just 4 feet deep, barely below the frost line, and used field stones stacking rather than timber supports for most of its length. Total construction time, 8 days. Total cost, $4.20. The design shouldn't have worked as well as it did. But O'Sullivan understood something about her specific situation that others had overlooked. Her dairy operation required twice daily milking regardless of weather. The tunnel gave her safe access to her 6 cows without surface exposure. More critically, she could move fresh milk through the passage to her root cellar immediately after milking, where the stable 45 degrees Fahrenheit temperature prevented both freezing and premature souring. During the January 1899 cold snap, less severe than 1897 but still brutal at minus 24 degrees Fahrenheit, O'Sullivan maintained her full milk production while neighbors lost days of productivity to weather disruption. Her tunnel, built for a fraction of what others had invested, provided exactly the functionality she needed for her specific operation. Word of these successes spread beyond Divide County. By 1900, tunnel systems had appeared as far east as Grand Forks, and as far west as the Montana border. The designs showed remarkable diversity. Short access tunnels, 30 to 50 feet, connected houses to barns, prioritizing human safety and convenience over temperature control. Common in areas with moderate winters. Extended thermal corridors, 100 to 200 feet, like Lars's original. These provided both access and significant thermal stability. Popular among serious livestock operations. Underground shelter chambers. Reinhardt's innovation, providing dedicated livestock housing for extreme weather events. Expensive, but nearly indestructible. Integrated cellar tunnel systems. O'Sullivan's approach, combining root storage with barn access. Favored by smaller operations and dairy farms. Multiple building networks. A few ambitious homesteaders created tunnel systems connecting houses, barns, workshops, and storage buildings into weather-independent complexes. The North Dakota Agricultural College, now North Dakota State University, sent Professor Edwin Clark to document the phenomenon in the summer of 1899. His report, published in the college's agricultural bulletin that fall, provided the first systematic analysis of what frontier farmers had discovered through necessity and observation. Clark's findings were remarkable. He measured 53 different tunnel installations across 4 counties. Temperature stability averaged within 8 degrees Fahrenheit year-round in properly constructed tunnels. Fuel savings range from 30% to 70% compared to conventional barn heating methods. Livestock mortality during extreme weather events dropped to nearly zero among farms with tunnel access. But perhaps most significantly, Clark documented the cost-effectiveness. The median tunnel installation cost $31 in materials and 22 days of labor. Compare this to the conventional solution: oversized barns with extensive insulation and heating systems, which required $200 to $400 in materials and often failed during extreme cold anyway. What these homesteaders have rediscovered, Clark wrote in his conclusion, is a principle known to ancient cultures worldwide. The earth itself is the most stable thermal environment available to builders. By working with this natural system rather than fighting against it through brute force heating, farmers achieve superior results at a fraction of the cost. His report recommended that the Agricultural College begin teaching underground construction techniques as standard curriculum for students planning to farm in northern climates. The recommendation was implemented in 1901. Before we wrap up this story, I need you to do something. Hit that like button if you've learned something valuable today. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming videos on frontier engineering, and drop a comment. Would you consider building a tunnel system on your property? Why or why not? I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts. By 1902, just 5 years after Lars Bjornsted completed his foolish tunnel, the technique had become so widespread that newcomers to the territory assumed it was standard practice. Young farmers, establishing their first homesteads, routinely included tunnel excavation in their initial construction plans, right alongside well digging and barn raising. The rapid adoption created an interesting historical artifact, a technology that appeared primitive to outsiders but represented sophisticated environmental engineering to those who understood it. Visitors from milder climates, seeing farmers disappear into holes in the ground to reach their barns, sometimes assumed they were witnessing poverty or backwardness. They missed entirely that these primitive passages often led to livestock operations more thermally efficient than anything available in their own temperate regions. Thomas Bradley, whose initial skepticism had been so pronounced, became one of the tunnel system's most articulate advocates. In a letter to his brother in Ohio, dated March 1901, he wrote, "I spent my first Dakota winter trying to transplant Ohio methods to Dakota conditions. I nearly lost everything. Then a Norwegian immigrant showed me that the solution wasn't more of what I already knew, more insulation, more fire, more expense, but something entirely different, something his ancestors had known for centuries. I'm embarrassed it took catastrophe for me to listen, but I'm grateful I learned before pride killed my herd. The tunnel I built in 1898 has already saved me more money than it cost 3 times over. More importantly, It saved me from 3 winters of sleep deprivation and panic every time the temperature drops. That alone is worth any amount of digging. The letter circulated among Bradley's extended family and eventually appeared in an Ohio agricultural newspaper, prompting inquiries from farmers as far south as Kentucky about tunnel construction in cold climates. The knowledge that had traveled from Norway to North Dakota was now radiating outward again, carried by letters, visitors, and the agricultural bulletins that connected farming communities across the continent. Underground construction techniques, refined through trial and error across dozens of homesteads, were being documented, systematized, and transmitted to the next generation. Lars Bjornsted, the man who'd endured mockery for digging his gopher hole, lived to see his tunnel technique become conventional wisdom. He died in 1923 at age 71, having survived 26 Dakota winters in comfort that would have astonished the skeptics of 1896. His tunnel, constructed with salvaged materials and hand labor in 1896, remained structurally sound and fully functional until 1957, when the farm was sold and the new owners, equipped with modern heating systems and convinced that old methods were obsolete, filled it in to make room for expanded grain storage. The irony was noted by several old-timers at the time. They'd seen the cycle before. Innovation dismissed as primitive, then adopted as proven, then forgotten as outdated, only to be rediscovered generations later when circumstances again demanded solutions that work rather than solutions that look modern. The tunnel barns of the northern plains never completely disappeared, but they faded from mainstream agricultural practice as 20th century technology offered alternatives that seemed more sophisticated. Central heating systems, improved insulation materials, electricity for warming lamps, propane heaters. These became the standard solutions to the same problem Lars Bjornsted had addressed with a shovel and salvage timber. By the 1970s, most tunnel systems had been abandoned or filled in. The knowledge of how to build them properly had largely vanished from agricultural education. When the energy crisis of that decade sent fuel costs soaring, a few old farmers remembered the underground passages of their grandparents' era and wondered aloud whether the old ways might have had merit after all. The question gained urgency in the off-grid homesteading movement of the 1990s and 2000s. New generations, seeking self-sufficiency and resilience, rediscovered that heating a barn through a Dakota winter consumed resources most small operations couldn't afford. They turned to books, to agricultural archives, to the few remaining physical examples of frontier tunnel systems, trying to reconstruct knowledge that had once been common. What they found surprised them. The engineering principles behind Lars Bjornsted's 1896 tunnel were not only sound, but in some ways superior to modern heated barn systems. Consider the mathematics. A conventional modern barn in northern climates might maintain 40 degrees Fahrenheit during winter using propane heaters consuming 500 to 800 gallons of fuel per season at current prices. That's $1,500 to $2,400 in annual heating costs. A properly constructed underground tunnel system, leveraging the Earth's constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit thermal mass, requires zero supplemental heating and provides comparable or better temperature stability. The initial construction cost appears higher. Modern excavation is expensive if done mechanically, and few people retain the hand-digging skills Lars's generation possessed. But amortized over the lifespan of the structure, Lars's tunnel functioned for 61 years. The economics favor the tunnel dramatically. No fuel costs, no heating system maintenance, no equipment replacement, just stable, reliable thermal performance requiring only the initial investment. Modern materials make construction easier than in 1896. Pressure-treated lumber prevents rot. Concrete blocks provide superior structural support compared to field stone. Proper drainage systems using perforated pipe ensure water management that Lars achieved through careful grading. Solar-powered LED lighting makes the passages safer and more functional than lantern light ever was. Yet despite these advantages, tunnel barn systems remain rare in contemporary agriculture and homesteading. Why? The answer reveals something uncomfortable about modern building culture. We've become conditioned to trust complexity over simplicity, manufactured solutions over natural systems, and visible technology over invisible physics. A propane heater with digital controls feels more advanced than a hole in the ground, even if the hole performs better and costs less. There's also the matter of expertise. Building a safe, functional tunnel requires understanding soil mechanics, water drainage, structural support, and thermodynamics. Not at an engineering degree level, but with the practical competence Lars's generation possessed through cultural transmission and hands-on experience. That knowledge base has been largely lost in mainstream culture, making people dependent on expensive contractors or hesitant to attempt construction themselves. The few modern homesteaders who've built tunnel systems report results that mirror the historical record. Temperature stability within 5 to 8 degrees year-round. Zero heating costs for barn spaces. Dramatic improvements in winter livestock health. Safe access during blizzards. And the intangible but valuable benefit of not fighting the climate, of working with natural thermal systems rather than against them through brute force energy consumption. One Minnesota homesteader, documenting his 2018 tunnel construction online, calculated that his $4,200 investment in excavation and materials saved him approximately $1,800 annually in propane costs compared to his previous heated barn system. Payback period, 2.3 years. Expected lifespan of the structure, 50+ years. Total lifetime savings, potentially $90,000 or more. But beyond economics, there's a philosophical dimension to what Lars Bjornstad's tunnel represents. It's a reminder that indigenous and traditional knowledge, whether from Norway, from Native American earth lodge construction, from Icelandic turf houses, or from any culture that survived in harsh environments, often contains engineering wisdom that modern society has discarded in favor of energy-intensive alternatives. The dismissal of such knowledge as primitive or outdated says less about its effectiveness than about our cultural biases toward complexity and consumption. A tunnel that requires no fuel, no maintenance, and outlasts modern heating systems isn't primitive. It's elegant. It solves problems through design rather than through continuous resource input. As climate instability increases and energy costs fluctuate, the resilience value of such systems becomes increasingly apparent. A homestead with tunnel access to livestock can weather power outages, fuel shortages, and extreme weather events that would devastate operations dependent on continuous energy input. The thermal stability that protected Lars's cattle in -38 degrees Fahrenheit weather provides the same protection today, requiring nothing more than the same earth that was there in 1897. Modern building codes, designed around conventional construction, often struggle to accommodate underground livestock structures. Permits can be difficult to obtain. Inspectors unfamiliar with the approach may reject sound designs. Insurance companies sometimes balk at covering non-standard buildings. These institutional barriers protect no one and perpetuate dependence on systems that are demonstrably less effective. The solution lies not in abandoning modern knowledge, but in integrating it with traditional wisdom. Use contemporary materials and excavation equipment to build what Lars built with hand tools. Apply modern understanding of thermodynamics and structural engineering to refine designs that worked through empirical trial and error. Combine the best of both approaches rather than assuming one must replace the other. If this story has given you a new perspective on old knowledge, I want you to do 3 things. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into frontier engineering and survival wisdom, and, most importantly, drop a comment sharing one piece of traditional knowledge from your own family or region that deserves to be remembered. Let's build a database of wisdom in the comment section. Your knowledge matters. Lars Bjornstad's tunnel was never about nostalgia or romantic primitivism. It was about physics, economics, and survival. The Earth at 50 degrees Fahrenheit provides stable thermal mass. Underground construction eliminates wind exposure. Proper design prevents water infiltration and structural failure. These facts don't change whether you're a Norwegian immigrant in 1896 or a modern homesteader in 2024. What changes is our willingness to learn from those who came before us, to test their solutions against our own needs, and to admit when simpler approaches outperform complex ones. The neighbors who mocked Lars's tunnel made that mistake once. We don't need to repeat it. The story of the tunnel barn isn't just history. It's a blueprint for resilience that remains as valid today as it was 128 years ago. The question isn't whether the engineering works. We know it does. The question is whether we're humble enough to dig. This screenplay presents historical and technical information for educational purposes. While based on documented frontier construction techniques and sound thermal principles, it does not constitute professional engineering advice. Anyone considering underground construction should consult with licensed engineers, comply with local building codes, obtain necessary permits, and ensure proper soil analysis and structural design for their specific location and needs. Historical practices, while effective in their context, must be adapted to modern safety standards and regulatory requirements.